Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar on the topic Understanding and Responding to Children Who Display Sexually Concerning Behavior. Let's have a quick check before moving forward. Could you tell me if you can hear me clearly? Please navigate to the panel on your right, click on the Questions tab, and type Yes if you can. I'll wait for a few responses. All right, that's fantastic. I'm Anita Agatich from Speechmark, and we are delighted to have with us today Laura Walker and Carol Lan, authors of Helping Children to Learn About Safer Sexual Behavior, Taking Steps to Safety, and Billy and the Tingles. To tell you a little bit about our experts, Laura has been a qualified social worker for 15 years with a background in child protection, fostering, and sexual abuse work. She is currently working with children at risk of or experiencing sexual exploitation. Carol is a qualified youth worker with 20 years background in a number of settings with children and young people aged 4 to 19 years, including youth work, children's rights, drug and alcohol services, sexual exploitation, and children of drug and alcohol using parents. The format of the webinar will be a 35 minutes of presentation followed by a 10 minutes Q&A at the end. Here are a few housekeeping notes. You can ask questions anytime during the webinar by typing them into the Questions tab on your right-hand panel. However, we will have them answered at the end of the presentation, and I will take only the questions without mentioning the names. Also, you can hide that panel when not required by clicking the orange arrow on top and maximize it again by clicking the same arrow. If you have any concerns, please type them into the Questions tab and we will try to resolve them as best we can. Now, before I hand over to our presenters, let's quickly have our first poll. You will see it going live on your screens now. We'd like to get an idea of who is listening in today. Please answer what your current role is. Okay, we'll be closing the poll in a couple of seconds. All right, so it looks like we have maximum number of parents or other, followed by 20 at 44%, then followed by 22% of teachers, 19% of counselors, and about 7% tie between teaching assistants and social care workers. All right, so without any further ado, I'd like to ask Carol and Laura to take over, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Carol.
And my name's Laura. Hi.
We've got about 35 minutes to touch on this issue, and we couldn't possibly do it justification in this limited time. So we plan to present information that we think that will be most use to you. We're going to start off with a brief overview of our resource book, and then an introduction to what we know is a very helpful tool that will assist you in recognising what normal, healthy sexual behaviour is in children, behaviour that may cause concern, and that which may be harmful, and a bit of guidance on responding to that. Next, we'll look at a case history which demonstrates some of the techniques from our resource book that can be used by carers and professionals where children's sexual behaviour is of concern. And finishing off with a chance to ask any questions about our resource or cases that you're working with. I think we have to acknowledge that children will have past experiences that we may never know the full extension of. However, parents and professionals and school staff and foster carers in particular will have the task of dealing with any worrying behaviours, that is sexual or otherwise, and a responsibility to keep those children and other children safe. We know that 30% of all child sexual abuse is displayed by children and young people themselves, and 20% of this number is from children under the age of 10. And there are also big concerns about the impact of watching pornography on children. And there are very few services in the UK for children who display sexually concerning or harmful behaviour. Hence our resource pack and storybook. We hope you enjoy this webinar, and again there's time at the end to answer any questions.
Hi, this is Laura speaking now. Just going to say a little bit about the resource pack before we go into some more detail. We've described the pack as being cutting edge because we have included guidance and activities that are designed to enable adults to have conversations with youngest children about pornography, which is something that people feel very concerned and apprehensive about when this has been a feature leading to some concerning behaviour in a child. These resources, along with the others in the pack, have been tried and tested within a specialist service with several hundred children over the years, aged between 4 and 17. So we know that they are effective in terms of engaging creatively with children, bringing a sense of fun and also promoting a feeling of agency. Our focus is on low-level behaviour, not the serious end stuff, which would need a more specialist service, a trauma-informed intervention and or an aim-to assessment depending on the level of the behaviour. If you would like to look on the Speechmark website, perhaps after today's webinar, or you might have looked already, there are several very positive reviews of the resource, written by both academics and practitioners in the field. They all acknowledge in their reviews that the strengths of the resource are that it addresses a need for a previous lack of support for professionals and carers in this area, that there is a need for the resource like this, and they particularly like the focus on child-centred, strength-based activities that are written with care and sensitivity from experienced workers. They also commented on the practicality and ease of use of the pack. I'm just going to hand over to Carol again to talk to you a little bit about some of the activities in the resource book. Moving on to the slide, lots of ideas.
So this slide showcases some of the sheets from our resource pack. The activities and methods in the pack are designed to cover a range of ages and abilities and learning styles, including advice and resources suitable for children who are on the autistic spectrum. That group feature heavily in referrals to our service. And there are also lots of anonymised examples in the book of all the pictorial plans, the narrative letters and the social stories that have been created with the help of the children we've worked with over the years. This means that there's plenty to draw from to give confidence to professionals who might be new to working with children or uneasy about approaching this topic with young children. So there's a few pages here from the resource pack, which is packed with ideas which are designed to help you organise your programme of work, to put children at ease and to build their self-esteem, which we know is very important at the beginning of an intervention, to explore with them and their families and others their skills and strengths and hopes for the future, to increase children's understanding of bodies and private parts and how we change as we go through puberty, to have conversations with children about okay and not okay behaviour and its effect on others, but crucially, advice and guidance on playing games and creating plans to build on safety for the future. I'm going to speak now about a very useful tool, the Brook Trafficlight tool. It's a tool based on one which was first developed in Australia. And they've detailed sexual behaviours which are ranged in 4 overlapping age groups, which are 0 to 5, 5 to 9, 9 to 13, and 13 to 17. If after the webinar you Google Brook Advisory Trafficlight tool, you will find a very useful 10-page guidance on what to do about the behaviours, with helpful comments to build awareness of yours and others' attitudes. They talk about the context of the behaviour, there's lots of descriptions of it. There's also information on female genital mutilation and, a piece about the law about consent. What the guidance says is that all behaviours warrant some response, even if it's expected behaviour. And for each age range, the behaviours are rated as green, which they say is healthy sexual development between similar aged and ability children, probably normal for that age, certainly consensual, perhaps experimental, driven by curiosity. And in this case, the response is recommended to be merely praise or some sort of feedback. Perhaps if the behaviour is not wanted, it might be some form of diversion, and perhaps information to children. Going up a level, they rate behaviour as amber, in which case there may be a difference in age. Short intervention from a trusted carer or professional, or referral to other services. The next section they call red, when these are more serious behaviours. They're adult-like behaviours involving lack of consent, power difference. There may be a use of force or coercion. It may have caused distress. It may be against the law. The response should be, in this case, certainly social care involvement, perhaps a strategy meeting, could be involvement of the police, or a referral to a specialist agency. We see that lots of sexual behaviours are normal in children. We are sexual beings right from birth. And in younger children, it's usually fueled by curiosity or experimentation rather than being sexually motivated. This is sometimes misinterpreted by adults who observe it. For example, we get reports sometimes of 5-year-olds masturbating in school. This is a very adult activity, and it's usually a case of the child playing with their privates over their clothes in times of anxiety for self-comfort. Some looked after children may have experienced abuse or trauma. They may be more anxious, and because of their histories, more likely to get things a bit wrong. And our book is developed to help professionals and carers respond appropriately to amber behaviours in younger children aged 7 to 11 or older if there are learning needs.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide, we're going to give you a little bit of time to read through the behaviours on the Trafficlight tool. We're just going to try and reconnect with the presentation, so can you just bear with us just for 1 minute?
Oh dear, we can't seem to move the screen.
Just bear with us. What's happening? Okay, sorry about the technical issue there, but we're now back on track with the red, amber or orange and green behaviours. So have a little look through those and familiarise yourself with that. I'll just give you a minute. Okay, so hopefully you've had a minute to look at those, and what we're going to do after a little explanation is to look at some examples of sexually concerning behaviour in picture format on the slides, and use the Trafficlight tool to help decide where each of the scenarios fits in the Trafficlight system. So when you're looking at the scenarios, we want you to ask yourselves a number of questions before deciding on which colour applies. Bear in mind this will only be a visual snapshot of what's happened. In real life cases there will be a lot more context, but these are some questions that people need to consider. Is the presenting behaviour consensual for all children or people involved? Is the behaviour reflective of natural curiosity or experimentation? Does the behaviour involve children or young people of a similar age or developmental ability? Is it occurring in public or private? Is it a cause for concern? And are other children or young people showing us signs of alarm or distress as a result of the behaviour? When we move to the first scenario, Anita will stop for a short poll so people can have a go at responding to the scenario. That will be the only poll though for the scenarios. Each of the others we'll just go through them and tell you where the behaviour fits in terms of the recommendations.
Okay, this is our first scenario. We've got Kian, aged 8, is really out in the park, and lady walking past with her dog looks a little bit surprised to see that, a little bit shocked. Where do people think that that's going to fit in the Brook Trafficlight tool? Is it green? Is it expected behaviour? Is it amber, which is causing a bit of concern, or is it red? Even greater concern. I'll give you some time now to do that poll.
All right, so the poll is live now and we have the results. So 88% of our participants think it's amber, 8% think it's red, and 4% think it's green. All right, so back to the presenters.
Okay, now we and the Brook service rated this as red, and don't worry if it doesn't match up to where you think it did. Again, it's just a snapshot of one little behaviour. And also this is a learning experience, and we can clarify any discrepancies during the question and answer session at the end. Now, we've placed this in the red category for 3 reasons, really. First of all, it's not consensual for all the people involved. It's actually occurring in a public space, and crucially it could make Kian vulnerable by attracting the attention of others. Now, it's just on the cusp really of red, because the category could well easily shift. For example, if the child is younger, or he's been dared by others to do the behaviour, or he could be just having a wee behind the bush and the lady's just come upon him by accident. But that does look quite purposeful, that behaviour there. We'll have another look at another scenario here. Now we've got Billy, who's 8, and he keeps pulling down children's pants at school, and this is obviously happening in the toilets. He looks as if it's very funny, but the poor lad who's had his pants pulled down looks a bit cross. Now, just to have a think to yourselves now whether you would put this in green behaviour, which is expected, amber, a little bit more concerning, or red. This is actually a picture featured in our little storybook that comes with the resource pack, and it's about Billy and the Tingles. And we've placed this behaviour in the amber category because, as it says in the description, Billy keeps repeating the behaviour, obviously despite being told off about it, one assumes, and it's causing other children to be upset. So we've put that in the amber. We'll have a look at the next one now. We've got Manat, age 12, and Sam sat on his knee having kisses. And they both look as if they're enjoying that. They've got their arms around each other. Nobody's pushing each other away. Have a little think about where you'd put that. Green or amber or red. Just think to yourselves now. I'll give you a second. We've actually placed this in the green category because it looks as if it's consensual for all the young people involved. It's safe and healthy behaviour, and it involves young people of a similar age. Now, I guess, you know, it could shift into amber if this was taking place in an area where it embarrassed others, or it got them into trouble, if it was in the middle of a classroom, for instance, or it was happening too often. So there's always more context to behaviours that would help you have a discussion with other professionals about where it would fit. If we go on now to the next scenario, again it's a picture taken from our book Billy and the Tingles, but we've called the little boy Ethan this time, and here he is. He sneaks his stepdad's phone into bed, covered himself up with the sheets, and he's found some very interesting pictures, and he looks quite delighted about that. Now, where would parents or professionals put that behaviour? Would they think it was expected? Would they be a little bit worried? Would they put it in amber, or more concerned in the red? Have a think. We've placed this behaviour in the amber category because there are concerns that Ethan's doing this behaviour in secret, so adults don't know it's happening, and actually could very well and easily lead him to accessing adult pornography. So we'd place that in amber. We'd have to do a bit of something about it. Okay, ready for the next scenario. Here we've got Sophie, age 10. She's touching her privates in the bathroom. Is that green? Is it expected? Is it okay for that age? Is it a little bit worrying? Is it amber? Or is it harmful and to be placed in the red category? What do people think? Take a few seconds to have a think about that. We've actually placed this in the green category because the behaviour is safe and healthy. It is okay to touch your own privates in private, and children need to hear that from us. Now, I think concerns may be increased perhaps if the door had been left open, or the behaviour was happening in a more public space, or it was happening so often that the little girl was making herself sore, or it was taking time away from everyday activities, and you might want to move it into the amber category then. Okay, we're moving on to the next scenario. Now we've got two sisters in foster care. They're aged 8 and 9, and they've been touching similar aged children on their privates, and there's the children on either side of them. Don't look too happy about that.
Okay, so this scenario is the basis for the case study. So we are going to place this in the amber category because, as Carol was saying, the children have touched children plural on their private, so the behaviour is happening with a number of children. It's happened over a period of time that's quite consistent, infrequent but consistent over a period of 18 months to 2 years. And when asked, the behaviour hasn't stopped, so we'd be concerned about this, but we haven't put it in red because of the nature of the age of the children, and the fact that they are quite well protected in terms of their own safety by foster carers. But the behaviour is affecting other children, so we would put that as a concern. This situation was a piece of work that I undertook with the two girls. The slide that you're looking at, the Rudy's case study, shows you a little bit about what had been happening. So if you have a little look at the concerning behaviour, it involves touching other children, usually in play, quite opportunistic, which is not untypical for younger children. So it was happening when adults weren't around, but wasn't happening for most of the time. So whilst it was causing a lot of concern when the occasions happened, there was a lot of time where it wasn't happening. So that was a strength of this situation. And the girls were okay in terms of having separate rooms, and they had a lot of supervision. So by the time I became involved with this case, there was a lot of anxiety and a lot of differences in perspective. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the work that we did. Some of it was very sort of visible, and some of it was a bit more in the background. Initially, the most important thing was to build a trusting relationship with the foster carers, so we had a platform to work with the girls from. I also did a lot of work with the social worker and supervising social worker in terms of sitting around a table with the carers, talking about what we wanted to achieve from the work, because everyone had different goals at the time. So there were 4 central themes. Number 1, building trusting relationships with everybody, because it had really upset people and the foster care was feeling very criticised, social worker was very anxious. Number 2 was clarifying everyone's goals, which is very important. Number 3 was assessing the risk with everybody and what their perceptions of risk were. And number 4 was safety planning and reviewing. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth now about the work that we did. Based on those 4 main themes. So it hadn't been happening beforehand. So I guess one of the main things about my role was to bring people together a lot more. Then we started to do some direct work with the children. Initially, I undertook individual work with the girls regarding their understanding of the body, body parts, names, what we do with them, changes that happen as you grow up, and their understanding of things like privacy and okay and not okay behaviour. So once I got an understanding of that, we also then had a frame of reference about where we were up to, and also the names that the girls gave to the parts of the body. The second point was that we externalised the behaviour. So we called it the Rudies. The girls chose that name. So we then had a narrative to talk about this problem without shaming and blaming the girls. So we referred to this problem as the Rudies, and then we were away in terms of doing a risk assessment. The girls were very central in terms of their role in that risk assessment because they were the expert. And what we used was a Trafficlight system again in terms of the situations and times where the Rudies were more likely to be around. So red was they were highly likely to be there, causing problems for them. Amber was they could turn up or maybe not, and green was they definitely wouldn't be there. So things like playing unsupervised in the garden, playing imaginary games like mums and dads was a red area. Amber was playing in the summer house and adults going off for a minute, leaving them unsupervised. Green was being in a structured sports event, playing football, etc. So we did the risk assessment, and then once we'd got those situations sorted out, we spoke about what the girls would like to do that were more in amber and red. And then we did safety plans, very practical safety plans that are available in the resource pack. If you choose to buy it, you can see this case study in a lot more detail. But I'll give you a couple of examples of the safety plans. one of the things they weren't allowed to do when I came along was go to this big apple play area. So we did a safety plan with the girls, which included 2 adults will come with us. We play in areas where adults can see us. If we change areas, we let someone know, and we won't go in dark places where the rudies were more likely to be hiding.
And they came up with these ideas,
Yes,
didn't
they did. We're supported by the foster carers, but it was their ideas because they'd done a risk assessment of this play area with us and could tell us where the rudies were more likely to be hiding. So we did another one about spending time with family and friends, because that was also very restricted. So we sit on separate sofas. We don't have a blanket over us because that can hide things. We have a space between us when we sit together. If there are a few of us, we keep our hands and feet to ourselves, and the doors stay open and adults check on us. Again, that was all the girls' ideas. And the positive thing about this was they had the most agency in this situation, and they had realistic ideas about what was happening because they felt comfortable talking about the rudies with professionals and carers. So we did a lot of that kind of work, and we reviewed these safety plans. So obviously making a safety plan is excellent, but they need to be reviewed over time with support from the carers or parents so they can see if they're actually working, and then you can adjust those either with more supervision, less, give opportunities for the children to build trust that in a managed way. For example, these girls used to cycle out with foster dad, and he started to let them have a bit more space in front of him so they'd go out of sight. So they started off with little steps, really. The outcomes from the work were that the girls, obviously I've talked a little bit about this, about greater agency, and invested in that process. There was a phased increase of independence, so they were allowed to do more activities as their trust developed. And they had a much more active social life, focused a lot around sport, which the girls were both interested in, and they gained in self-esteem because they were allowed to do more of that. They were also allowed to stay with the foster carers long term, which was sort of under question a little bit before the work was done. And they chose to put the rudies in the bin at the end of the intervention and kind of said goodbye to them, really. So it was a very positive piece of work in terms of the involvement of the children, and it just demonstrates that if you work well with children in terms of this behaviour, they can come up with their own solutions, and adults support that. It can be very effective.
And crucially, they didn't come back as referrals. You know, the rudies stayed in the bin, didn't they?
They did.
Yeah. Okay. That more or less concludes what we have to say today, but I think it might be time now for any questions that you might have. If you
Wow, thank you, Laura and Carol. Yes, this has been really helpful, and we've been getting questions already. So let's go right into them. So the first one says, an 11-year-old boy just comes up to our secondary school. He keeps forcefully grabbing female staff from behind and rubbing against them, telling them they're girls, not women, and without asking leading questions. He's told us he's seen behavior like this on the computer at home. How best to deal with this situation? And it also says he can be very forceful.
Okay, so what we would say to this situation is that we would recommend making contact with social care to discuss this case. The reason being, well, for several reasons really. One is the force and the persistent nature of this behaviour, and it's quite adult-like in terms of coming from behind and rubbing himself against people.
And very disrespectful towards adults as well. It often happens between children of similar ages, but it suggests that there needs to be an intervention here. And certainly he may have viewed adult pornography or seen behaviour like that at home and he's getting it wrong. We don't want to make out he's a mini sex offender, but he needs some help. And so do the family in creating safety online and in gaming. And there's lots and lots of advice about that. See up and have lots of advice if you want to go to their page. There's also an excellent advice if you Google Internet Matters. That's brilliant for helping parents and carers set safety at home, and TV and laptops and tablets. Yeah. Okay.
Because the other issue here, Carol, isn't it, is this boy's about to be going into puberty.
Absolutely.
And possibly becoming aroused by this, and that needs to be redirected in a more healthy way. I
think that, there needs to be certainly some professionals getting together to discuss this. Okay.
All right. So another one says, how do we have a reference point for what is normal sexual behavior, for what might be a wide spectrum for a particular age group?
I'm not sure. Aneta, could you just read that question again?
Sure. It says, how do we have a reference point for what is normal sexual behavior, for what might be a wide spectrum?
I think that the advice that we've given about looking at the Brooks Service Advisory Trafficlight tool will give you a baseline there for professionals to get together and discuss where particular behaviour fits, because the tool itself has lots and lots of examples of different types of behaviour for different age groups, and I'm sure that you will find something similar there that fits with something that you might be worried about. But by all means, have a discussion about this. Don't let one person make a final decision. The behaviour needs to be seen in context, and professionals need to discuss where they think it fits, so that there's a cohesive response to this. Yeah.
There is another useful organisation that has produced guidance around what's expected for different age groups of children, and that's the Lucy Faithfull Foundation. They have, if you go on their website as well, they've got resources there, and I know they've got information about what's expected. One of the most concerning things is something's very secretive. So I'd go on that website and have a look at what they produced as well.
They've got some fabulous resources, particularly when there's been instances of children or adults even viewing illegal pornography. Okay.
All right. Have you worked with children on the autism spectrum and used these strategies?
Absolutely. A great proportion of our referrals are for children with learning needs and children on the autistic spectrum, and it's understandable that these children get more things wrong than most children, particularly as they approach puberty, and this surge of emotions and hormones, and their bodies change, and they have maybe not the cognitive ability to cope with these surging emotions, and they will experiment and get things wrong perhaps more than most children. And there's lots of advice in the resource pack about different ways to work with this, in particular to develop social stories. Okay?
Okay, great. And what would anxiety-related sexual behaviors in teenagers look like?
It could be a whole range. Anxiety makes us get things wrong more and more, and it might be increased masturbation, it could be inappropriate sexual behaviour, it could be inappropriate language, and again the Brooks Service Advisory Tool gives lots of examples and where they fit for that particular age range.
I think in terms of teenagers, you would need to be thinking about what their life history had. what they'd experienced in their life histories rather than as we can offer some general stuff that Carol's just mentioned, but I think that you'd need to know a bit more about that young person and whether they had learning needs, whether they had been experience of abuse, neglect, and whether those were contributing to their behaviour. There's a useful resource very recently brought out from Research in Practice, and that has now included information about how neglect can contribute to sexually harmful behaviour or sexual exploitation. Basically, it's very difficult to draw very broad strokes on teenage behaviour, because by the time they get to that age, they're experiencing a lot more life events. So I don't think it would be responsible for us to do any more kind of broad strokes, really.
No, and which is why when we take referrals, which we do over the phone for this behaviour, we ask referrers to go into a great deal of detail about exactly what the behaviour is and some background information about the child, so we can decide how to prioritise that and what work needs to be done, and whether it's high or medium or low risk. Okay.
All right, so we have time for one final question. It says, please can you give any views on boys with ADHD and inappropriate sexual behavior? Is there usually a link?
What an excellent question. We have noticed that children with ADHD feature again quite heavily in our referrals. Because these children act so impulsively, particularly when we have referrals of children with ADHD and Asperger's. We know to start that intervention by saying to the family, we're not going to be able to fix this. It's going to take persistent, committed, long-term responses from all the adults around that child to keep reminding them about the expectations that they have of behaviour, and it's best presented in the form of a social story so that children are given a visual reminder about what behaviour is okay and what's not okay, and what might happen if they show okay or not okay behaviour. Yeah. Okay. You have any more to say about that, Laura?
I think that what Carol has said is absolutely right, in that if you're working with a young person or child with ADHD, then the adults around the child, if the child's experienced this kind of issue, they need to sign up for the long term in terms of supporting that child. It's not you do the intervention.
There's no quick fix.
And then the child knows it. They need to internalise it, and that might take many, many, many times of talking, many times of reminding prior to situations. We can't emphasise that enough, really.
And social stories do this, because you sit and develop them with the child, and they're unique to each child and each situation, and they are visual prompts which can be displayed and the child's attention brought to them, particularly at trigger behaviour that's occurring at playtime. The child will need to be reminded before they go out to play, let's just have a look at this. If you do this behaviour, this is what will happen. This is the behaviour we're looking for, and then we'll be pleased. But all that displayed visually. Okay.
All right, thank you so much again, Laura and Carol. We really appreciate the time and efforts you have taken for today's webinar. And also a huge thanks to everyone for joining in. If you have any more questions, by all means, please send them through and we will do another Q&A with our experts. The recording of this webinar and the presentation will be available shortly. Don't forget the 20% discount we're offering exclusively to our participants for the resource. You can get it online at speechmark.net using the discount code WB3 that you can see on your screens. Thank you again for joining us, and have a good evening.